Welcome back to the Catholic View for Women. Thanks so much for tuning in. Our program is a show for women and anyone else who wants to watch. News and views from a truly Catholic perspective. Interesting topic today, making the switch from contraception to NFP, natural family planning. Oh boy, is this a big topic. Big topic.
And you know, one of the reasons why, you know, people don't even understand NFP is because it's a medical issue. They're really not familiar with what NFP is, and they don't understand how bad contraception is. And so that's why the saint for this episode that we selected is Saint Janet Morana Mola, and she was a physician, and her feast day is April the 28th. All right, she made a heroic choice, but it was something her family members and friends testified she prepared for every day of her life. Her heroic virtue, genuine holiness of life, selflessness, and quiet joy remind all of us that God entrusts us with a personal vocation. Each and every day presents us with choices that have the power to prepare us to take that heroic action whenever it will be called for. We can do that, however, only if we surrender ourselves and what we desire to God and His will for us. Dr. Mola threw light on the importance of Christian family, and by her life and her conscious sacrifice, she threw light on the importance of Christian schools and Catholic action in the formation of the human being in Christian values, and it gives us guiding principles to which the Christian subordinates his own life, as Dr. Morana Mola knowingly did. The heroism of her Christian life will bear fruit. This example of lay sanctity lived in the sacrament of matrimony, as the Vatican Council II teaches, will encourage many Christians to seek God in holy matrimony. The exemplary fame of Christian conduct lived by Janet Morana Mola is valid proof. Not only was she the first married laywoman to be canonized, but also a wife and mother who had a secular profession. And finally, you know, she was a working mom 4 decades ago, when this was very unusual. So she's really a saint of today and a saint for this show because of the fact of we're talking about contraception and NFP, and obviously Janet Morana Mola, being a physician, was before it was formally called NFP, was advising that for her patients.
Yes, and how wonderful, because each saint, we see a little bit of Christ in each saint. They're like, you know, small Christs. And in Janet Morana Mola, we see a physician that's really upholding life, and to the point that her own life is called upon. Right. And it reminds me of what Father Frank teaches about, you know, Christ says, "Here is my body," and then feminists say, "Here is my body." Right. But it's contradictory. Yeah, exactly. One is saying, "Here is my body, and I give it as a gift to you," and feminists are saying, "No, I just have my body.
Closing themselves in.
It's for myself."
Right.
So Jana literally had the opportunity to lay her life down, you know, for her own child. So she had this ultimate choice, and she chose life for her own child. And every day she prepared for that choice by her life, her joyful witness. And that's one thing that we were talking about in preparation, was to how much she is a pro-life saint, but also just she was alive. She was joyful. She loved so many things that we as Catholics know that we can enjoy as well.
And imagine her family. I mean, her husband was there at her canonization of her daughters. I mean, imagine that. And of course, Teresa and I were very fortunate. Recently, we got to go to her hometown and visit with the family outside of Milan. And I mean, what a privilege that was. What a privilege.
And what's so beautiful about St. Janet Morana Mola is she really encompassed, as you mentioned earlier, the entire Catholic woman, that it's okay in moderation to enjoy life. I mean, she loved sports. She loved clothes. I mean, she was from Milan, the couture capital of the world, for crying out loud.
And I had to probably pull Teresa away out of the stores.
In honor
Teresa,
of
we're
our
here to
saint
see
for this
the
show,
saints' families. Stay focused, stay focused.
But also, I think what a great example for NFP. And people are saying, well, how does she have NFP? Because of her understanding of embracing this whole encompassing act of love, because that's what NFP is about. In the notes that Father Frank gave us, our spiritual director, he was saying that you have to really truly understand what's at stake here in terms of NFP. Can you share some of the thoughts that Father Frank gave us?
Father Frank writes, if people are thinking of natural family planning, NFP, simply as a method to avoid pregnancy, then if they know all the details of how it works, they are misunderstanding it. NFP is a lifestyle, a way of virtue that encompasses the whole reality of the relationship and communication, the trust and responsibility between the spouses. It is a way of life based on the conviction, first of all, that their fulfillment is found in total reliance on God and total giving of self to Him and one another. In that context, they know that they are called to be generous in welcoming life. At the same time, it is an informed and intelligent generosity, and so it allows for evaluating the circumstances to decide whether and when to engage in those actions that may give rise to a new life. In exercising this informed generosity, the spouses realize that fertility itself is a joint reality. It isn't something the woman should be expected to turn on or turn off by some chemical or physical intervention. Moreover, the tracking of fertile periods by NFP is envisioned as joint activity. Let's see when we are fertile. And if the decision is made to abstain during fertile times, this is also a joint decision. But it is not
a decision to abstain from love. I love that statement.
Yeah, I love that too.
In fact, the couple learns to express and experience new manifestations of their love and respect, their communication and communion with each other, including in those times of abstaining.
Yeah, and you know, this is the whole thing. You know, what the birth control pill says is, you know, it really devalues the woman in a way, because the husband can basically say, well, let's have sex tonight, tomorrow night.
Well, so can the woman say that to the husband.
Say that
so
to the
it's
husband.
Vice versa type of quid pro quo
it's like,
type
okay,
of a situation.
we don't have to worry about getting pregnant. That's out of the picture. We're taking the pill, so it's just whenever we want.
Exactly, it's for the pleasure.
Right,
you become the object of somebody's
And really what they're doing by contracepting is they're stopping the
contraception,
anti-conceiving, and of course we all know it's an abortifacient, because sometimes, you know, it doesn't stop concepting, it stops implantation.
So you could be aborting.
You could be aborting
children.
too, and that was one of the things I went through in my testimony.
Yes, I read that in your book, Janet.
Yeah, my testimony is in the book, Recall Abortion, my new book, and you know, it's when I came to that realization, when I came back to the church of, oh, so those years I was contracepting, I was aborting life, and I was also aborting God's will for me. See, that's the important thing, is that you're putting your hand up to God and saying, no.
Well, you're playing God.
Yeah, you're playing
You're
God.
taking control, right?
Exactly. Now, recently, Teresa, we spoke to someone about this topic.
Yes, and I think it's really important to go out there and get real people and find out their experiences, and that's what we try to do on each show, and whether it's our What Do You Have to Say segment or the individual interviews that we've done. And I was particularly struck by this ministry, and I found out about them when I was giving a talk actually up in Flint, Michigan, at a fashion show for girls. It was a modesty fashion show, and I gave a talk, and these two women approached me afterwards, and they have this ministry, and they've been on with us before in this year's segments. But in particular, one of them did make the switch from contraception to NFP, and now she's teaching.
She teaches NFP. Now that's cool, full circle.
Yeah, full circle.
Not just she practices NFP, but now she's teaching others about the beauty of it.
Sharing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you can be so far off center, away from church teaching, and not only have a reversion to your faith and come back and embrace the teachings, but to want to share those teachings with other women is huge. So let's take a listen to what Cindy has to say from Good Girl Comeback about making the switch from contraception to NFP.
Well, NFP can be used with a contraceptive mentality, so there has to be some caution exercised in that. But the difference is that God created the act of intercourse, of marital love, of sex, to be two things together, the bonding and the babies. So when you take either of those out of the picture, then you are basically taking what God created and saying, you know, God, I have a better idea. So it also erodes the marriage when you take one of those out of the picture. So what contraception does is it takes the babies out of the picture, and that's the whole contraceptive mentality, is separating babies and sex. And then once you take that out of it, it can erode the marriage, and it doesn't keep God's creation intact. Well, the thing that surprised me about the church's teaching was it wasn't just a no. There was a tremendous and beautiful yes behind the no. And that was that the church, in following God's plan, was trying to protect women, protect families, protect children, protect marriages by keeping this tremendous gift of sex within the safe place that it belongs, which is in marriage. And that all of the don't have sex before you're married, all of that talk was protecting, trying to protect women. And here I thought all the time it was oppressive, and that's what our society teaches us, that we have a right to this, to pleasure at any cost if that's what we want. And ultimately, we have to realize that the happiness that God promises us by following His plan is the eternal happiness, whereas the happiness or the pleasure people are looking for with hookups and our hookup culture is fleeting. It only lasts as long as you're doing it, whereas the pleasure and the eternal happiness is forever. Even though it may seem harder at first, ultimately it will lead us to greater happiness. That's where it started, and then it started to dawn on me how this is related to so much. There's so much: the abortion, the decline of marriage, the destruction of marriage, now the redefining of marriage. All of that, it just slowly became evident to me that this issue is core in our society today. And I just became so grateful at God's mercy for me for forgiving all the things that I had rejected and done wrong, that I just had to start sharing this message because I knew that people need it. And there's not a lot of people who feel called to share the message. So the more people that are out there that feel called, the more people that can hear this message, and perhaps a seed can be planted and they too can fall in love with the church's teaching. Not for the no on the outside, or not because the church said so, but because it makes sense, it's reasonable, it's ultimately produces happiness and protects marriage and children.
I think it's important to have someone like her, because so many of us growing up Catholic are thinking, or may have been, taught incorrectly, that, oh, this is just something the church is, a bunch of men in red hats in Rome are lording over
telling
us and telling us what to do with our
right.
bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just the whole concept of the church's teaching. First of all, we've known from the previous shows where we talked about the pew surveys that the women that are in the pews don't really even understand the church's teaching on contraception. So how can you reject what you don't know? Step one is get a mano vitae, as we've been saying, and see what the teaching is that you're saying, oh no, the church is oppressive and against us.
Proof of the church teaching is shown in the wounds of those who reject them.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And notice, studies show that couples that contracept have a high rate of divorce.
Couples who live together have a high rate of divorce.
And NFP couples, very, very low, if any divorce at all, couples who practice NFP.
And so people that are having these conversions and coming up with these testimonies, in reality, it wasn't that they rejected the teaching. They really didn't even know what it was. So what kind of job are we doing of promoting it? How are we inviting others to practice
Well, we're going to explore that when we come back, because we interviewed my pastor, Monsignor Michael Bulgarin from St. Joan of Arc Parish in the Archdiocese of Detroit, who was also a canon lawyer and an expert in terms of dealing with these issues in the pews in the churches. We'll be right back. This is one of those sensitive topics that everybody seems to get a little bit testy about when we bring it up, but it's an important one that needs to be discussed. We're talking about making the switch from contraception to NFP, and I took the time to interview my pastor, who's a wonderful teacher in the Archdiocese of Detroit. Not so much about the science behind NFP, but really the importance of, we were talking about before, we can't reject the teachings if we don't know them. We need to know, well, we are technically rejecting them, but really we're not rejecting them in the sense of knowing what's available to us as Catholics. So how do we get that message out
Well,
there?
and I think we want to hear too from Monsignor about the pastoral approach. You know, as a priest, you know, when women come in and confess that sin of contracepting and how they deal with that, and you know, like kind of
Because
like
there's a lot of guilt. I know I had a lot of guilt.
There is a lot of guilt, and sometimes women are afraid to go to confession. You know, they're afraid, like, it's going to yell at me. You know, what am I going to do?
Lightning's going to come down, but
yes, you know,
right.
so you know, I think listening to Monsignor, so he can give women listening advice, like, okay, I think I want to start moving in the right direction, but I don't know where to start. Where do I start?
Right. And what happens if you are really trying to live up to the church teachings and your spouse is not at all interested?
Not on the same
and doesn't
page
take it
at
seriously.
all, at all.
So we pose those very challenging questions to Monsignor Michael Bulgarian. Let's take a listen.
I think they're willing to listen and learn, and again, talk about misconceptions. I look at my young couples when they come for marriage counseling, pre-marriage counseling, and I ask them to go through one of our NFP courses in the Archdiocese, and they say, really? We have to do that? What's NFP? You know, they don't even know what it is, and I think, you know, again, it's education. And my making my couples go gives them the educational experience of what the different methodologies are for NFP. We have learned so much over the last many years, and like you say, it's not just the rhythm method. There's so many other ways to practice natural family planning. And again, it's misconception. It's a lack of knowledge. And how do we get that knowledge out there? Unfortunately, I think today we have to use little sound bites, quick little 3-minute videos that we could just distribute ourselves, that then families can redistribute themselves. I mean, I've got, you know, a parish of 4,000 families, and we only have maybe about 1,500 valid emails on our email distribution list. But that's 1,500 people that if I then encourage them to, why don't you pass this on to your family and friends, let them pass it on. And so, you know, I'm always looking for those small little ways to just, well, you know, a simple little bait on the end of a fishing line to get them in to understand the topic a little bit more. Lots of misconceptions. We have to teach, we have to preach, we have to, you know, catechize people about the great teachings of the church. And this is, you know, utilizing NFP would be one great example. I think it's something that they need to talk about with their confessor, their own spiritual director, with their pastor. You know, they are trying their best. I think they have to continue to encourage their spouses to practice NFP. And again, it's simple little ways. To give a spouse a book or a 60-minute DVD, most of them aren't going to watch it until they've learned a little bit more. So are there small pamphlets that it can just become a conversation? Just put it on the dining room table, put it up in the bedroom or something, so it just picked up something that they could read quickly, you know, in the privacy of their own home. And invite them to come to a workshop. Listen, I'm going to this class. You know, why don't you come along with me? If they say no, keep inviting them. And I think that eventually the persistence, Scripture gets fulfilled. The persistence will eventually win them over. So never give up hope. I mean, that's the thing that I tell all of my couples. Never give up hope. Continue to try and continue to talk. And utilize your parish priests, utilize the deacons in your parish, the religious that are working in your parish, and seek out their advice too.
Maybe go talk as a couple.
It's great that it's on the package, but the reality is, how many people read all that stuff? How many people read all the contract information we're supposed to read? You know, again, we've become a world of sound bites, you know. So how can we take that message and put it on a quick little sign that maybe I put out on my front, you know, electronic sign in church? How does it become just a simple little thing that I tweet out to my parishioners? Again, it's got to be small little segments to reel them into the teachings of the church. And people are not taking the time to read all that stuff. I mean, it's great that we have this knowledge. It's great that, you know, we want to educate people, but don't put a book in front of them. Don't put a 60-minute DVD in front of them and expect them to be coming running down the door. You know, we've got to start out small, and then you present the book. Then you present, you know, the DVD. The same is true also of couples who are experiencing difficulties in trying to conceive children. You know, there's great resources out there in the Catholic Church to help teach them different ways that are approved methods in the Church for the conception of children. And again, I've got to start off with a small little way of inviting them, and then I hand them the book.
You know, it's so refreshing to hear Monsignor. You know, it just reminds me back, you know, when I was growing up in the age of when Humanae Vitae first came out, and the dissension in the church at the time, huge. You know, you could go to confession, ladies, on this side of the church, priests would say, you know, using the pill was a sin. On this side, he said, if you had a good reason, you could use it. And I can remember in my pre-Cana class telling the priest that, well, you know, I'm the oldest of 4 children, and I'd just like to delay starting. Oh, that's a good reason, good reason. It was giving you the blessing to go. But so Monsignor was so clear. Right. It's just such a breath of fresh air to hear a priest standing up and saying, okay, but in a pastoral way, as a good shepherd, but at the same time, not muddying the waters, but telling us the truth. That's what we need. Women are hungry to hear the truth. I really believe that. Right. And I think if more priests were like Monsignor Begarin, of course, like Father Pavone, you know, we wouldn't have as much trouble. And we know from the Pew survey, where did over 73% of them get their information from? The homilies. So if they're not hearing it from the trusted shepherds, where are they going to hear the truth? Because the secular media is saying how great contraception is.
I think if they know that this is bad for them, that going down this route is bad always. First and foremost, your soul is at stake here, because this is an intrinsic evil according to church teaching. But also what you will find with the church, and this is what I found in my own research and my own reversion, is that the church is doing this because this is what's best for you, not because it's trying to punish you. That's right. Or Benedict XVI, one of my Catholic rock stars, as you guys know, I just think the world of his writings. And he said, shortly after he began his pontificate, he said, God is not a series of no's, but a big yes to love and to life. And George Weigel had a great quote during the interregnum, right before Pope Francis was elevated to the position of the new pontiff. And George Weigel was interviewed by MSNBC, and the network were saying, oh, well, the church is the usual. They got to change on contraception, change on abortion, change on the gay marriage thing. And George said, you know, truth cannot change. And when the church says no, it's usually because it leads to an elevated yes. And I thought, wow, what a great quote. Good answer. Isn't that great?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, we could also, of course, pray for more priests and bishops and monsignors to promote NFP, but also I think us lay people, we have to also see how we can support this outreach for natural family planning. We need more teachers. In the Hispanic community, we have very few teachers. There's areas with absolutely no Spanish-speaking instructors, so there is a call for us. It's a very beautiful vocation to teach, because you're not only teaching a method for birth regulation, you're also training spouses in love. And I like what Father Frank says about